In February of 2012, a barista named Samantha Koenig locked up the small coffee stand where she worked in Anchorage, Alaska, brushing snow from the counter as she prepared to leave for the night. Security cameras would later capture a man approaching her through the darkness. He wasn't wearing a mask, he didn't rush, he didn't shout, he simply walked forward, deliberate and calm, as though this were something he had rehearsed. Because he had. His name was Israel Keyes. Keyes would eventually confess to multiple murders, yet investigators believe the true number may never be known. He didn't stalk people he knew or linger around familiar neighborhoods. He avoided killing in the same place twice. He crossed thousands of miles to commit his crimes, deliberately blurring jurisdictions and timelines. He buried weapons years in advance, and when he was finally caught, he made sure that most of what he knew would die with him. He was born in 1978 in Utah and raised in a deeply religious survivalist household. His family moved frequently, often living far from towns in rural parts of Washington state, growing their own food and limiting contact with the outside world. There was isolation, rigid discipline, and a constant emphasis on self-reliance. Later, Keyes joined the United States Army and served overseas in the early 2000s, an experience that exposed him to travel and structure while allowing him to blend into systems designed to track millions of people rather than one individual. When he returned home, he constructed a life that appeared stable and ordinary. He worked construction jobs, started his own contracting business, purchased a house in Anchorage, and settled into a long-term relationship. He became a father. Neighbors described him as polite, quiet, and dependable, someone who kept to himself but paid his bills and showed up to work on time. He had no meaningful criminal record. Nothing about him suggested violence. Nothing about him demanded attention. Investigators would later say that this normalcy was not accidental. Keyes lived two carefully separated lives. One involved school schedules, grocery runs, work sites, and family obligations. The other unfolded in secret, stitched together by airline tickets, rental cars, remote highways, and nights spent in unfamiliar towns. He traveled relentlessly, sometimes flying across the country only to rent a vehicle and drive hundreds more miles in looping routes, meant to confuse anyone attempting to trace his movements. He paid with cash whenever possible. He used burner phones. He shut devices off for days at a time. He avoided returning to the same locations. He avoided witnesses. He avoided habits. Long before committing a crime, he prepared. Perhaps the most disturbing aspect of his planning was something he referred to as his kits. Across the United States, in wooded areas, state parks, campgrounds, and rural clearings, he buried buckets and containers filled with firearms, ammunition, restraints, shovels, chemicals, duct tape, and other supplies intended for killing and concealment. Some were hidden years before they were ever retrieved. Others were never located at all. Investigators eventually uncovered several of these caches, each one a chilling confirmation of how far in advance he thought about violence. Keyes claimed there were many more, scattered so widely and buried so carefully that only he would ever know their exact coordinates. Unlike many serial offenders, Keyes insisted that he did not stalk particular individuals for long periods. He chose strangers, people who happened to cross his path at the wrong moment, couples traveling through isolated areas, campers in remote locations, individuals finishing late shifts. He avoided forming patterns that could be linked back to him. He avoided taking trophies that could connect cases. He avoided leaving bodies where they might be easily discovered. Sometimes he drove hundreds of miles after flying across the country simply to commit a single crime, then vanished again before anyone realized something was wrong. For years, law enforcement agencies across different states investigated disappearances without realizing they might be connected. There was no signature, no consistent geography, no obvious timeline, just families waiting, posters fading on bulletin boards, and files quietly moving into cold case storage. Everything changed after the abduction of Samantha Koenig in February of 2012. Keyes kidnapped her from the coffee stand and drove away in her own vehicle, later using her debit card at ATMs across several states. Those transactions created something he usually avoided, a digital trail. Authorities tracked the withdrawals to Texas, where he was arrested during a traffic stop. When officers searched him, they found her phone and her bank card. DNA evidence soon linked him directly to the crime, closing off escape routes he had relied on for years. Confronted with overwhelming proof, Keyes began speaking to investigators, though always on his own terms. During hours of FBI interviews, he appeared calm and controlled, sometimes sarcastic, sometimes cooperative, but only when he believed it benefited him. He refused to discuss certain cases, refused to provide locations, refused to identify victims. He attempted to negotiate, requesting guarantees about sentencing before offering details. He spoke about murder with an unsettling detachment, describing acts of violence the way someone might describe running errands or completing chores. At moments, he joked. At others, he corrected agents when they misstated dates or sequences. He sought to manage the conversation, to remain the one directing its course. Agents also noticed what he avoided. He rarely spoke about his daughter. He deflected questions about family life. When pressed about his crimes themselves, he showed little visible emotion. No breakdowns, no obvious rage, just calculation. Keyes admitted to several murders, and authorities formally linked him to at least 3 victims. But investigators reviewing his extensive travel history, financial records, and the number of weapon caches he had prepared, believed the real total could be far higher. He claimed that some victims were left in places where discovery was unlikely: lakes, abandoned mines, dense wilderness, areas where weather, animals, and time would gradually erase evidence. In December of 2012, while awaiting trial, Israel Keyes was found dead in his jail cell after taking his own life. Investigators later revealed that he had left behind cryptic writings and disturbing drawings on the wall, imagery that suggested his final act had been planned with the same deliberation that marked everything else he did. With his death, the possibility of learning the full scope of his crimes largely vanished. The most frightening part is not only what he did, it is how ordinary he looked while doing it. A man browsing tools in a hardware store, a father waiting in line, a customer paying in cash, a stranger passing on the sidewalk without drawing a second glance. Sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones no one notices at all.